Hello chess fans, welcome to Chess Openings Explained. I'm Nick Risko, your instructor for the evening, and we are here with our next installment in our Scotch series, all about the Scotch game. And this week, next week, and the following are going to be the last three parts. We're going to be covering some of the main moves that Black has that are a real challenge to White. Up till this point, we've covered a lot of dubious sidelines from Black. We've also covered some wild and dubious gambits from White, but now we're going to start getting into the real Scotch lines. And tonight, we're going to be focusing on the queen moves in the Scotch. Those two queen moves being Queen H4 and Queen F6. So let's get right into it here. Starting off with our main Scotch position, we have E4, E5, Knight F3, Knight C6, and D4, the Scotch. Now last week we started covering what happens if Black takes on D4, and here we get the Knight recapturing in the center. And the first one we're going to go over, Queen H4, is a very tough move to face over the board. This is known as the Steinitz variation of the Scotch game, and if White doesn't know what they're doing, it looks like you're just going to lose a pawn, and the game's just going to be tough for you. Now, the move Queen H4 has a very direct threat. You're attacking the E4 pawn. The question that is being posed to White is, how are you going to deal with this? So I'm going to give a second for the chat to take a look at the position, and actually you guys tell me how you guys think you should deal with this. If you've never seen this position before, what is your instinct? What would you play in a tournament if you were faced with this move? I'm actually curious to see what people think. So queen is attacking. I do want to point out, if you're trying F3 to defend the pawn, this just isn't going to work. This F2 pawn is pinned. That is an illegal move. So unfortunately, that does not work. Clause is suggesting knight to C3. Okay, so knight to C3 does defend the pawn. The response from Black here is going to be bishop to B4. And the point of bishop B4 is it's pinning the knight that you just used to defend your pawn. So if you can give me a little bit of a follow-up here as to how you're still going to deal with this pawn, let's go with that. Do we have any other ideas in the chat? I'm not saying knight C3 is bad. I'm just saying I want a little bit more than just saying knight C3. I guess while we're looking for ideas, I will start covering some of the more dubious moves, with the most dubious probably being queen to D3. Queen to D3 is very simple. It just says, hey, I'm defending the pawn that is attacked. But here, Black can go knight F6, and in practice, Black has scored very well with knight F6, as in they've won all two games that this position has been featured in, according to the Lichess Masters database. On Lichess, though, the stats are still pretty good for Black, with White mainly trying taking on C6 and playing knight to D2 as the top two moves, but Black is still scoring roughly 58%, and that's 58% win, not just score any points at all. So queen to D3, just not a very practical move as far as, statistically, not good responses. Just got a subscription from Brian Felix. Thank you for the sub. All right. The other move here that you can try is actually, okay, so we have another guess here, bishop to D3. But bishop to D3, what are you going to do against knight takes D4? Just a question. Kinda looks like you're down a piece. So I don't think bishop D3 is the answer. The other move that White has is actually just ignoring the fact this pawn is hanging, and I believe this is actually the mentality White should have if Black plays queen H4. Defending this pawn is going to be very difficult. And we'll get more into knight c3 in just a little bit. But what happens if you say, all right, I'm just going to lose this pawn. I'm going to play knight b5 instead. Knight b5 with the idea of hitting c7. And this is one of the drawbacks to queen h4, is that as soon as this queen moves, c7 is a weak square. So knight b5 is looking to take advantage of this. And black has two moves here that they can try, although I think only one of them looks practical. Bishop c5 has been played before, but this is the one that I don't think is all that great. Now, white needs to be a little careful. They can't just go for this pawn hoping to get a rook, because the idea of bishop c5 is they're threatening mate. So after king d8, there's no way to protect your knight and to stop the checkmate. So you're just going to be losing a piece here. You have to play queen e2 to stop the checkmate, but then king c7, you're down a piece. So unfortunately, going for the pawn is not good enough. However, you can develop your queen, let's say queen f3. And after queen f3, okay, black can try knight d4, hitting the queen, going for c2. You can also trade on d4, but I'm not a big fan of this for white, mainly because there's a pretty forcing continuation here. Knight takes c7, king has to move because it's in check, so king d8, hitting the knight here, and now queen f4. It's offering a queen trade. It's still protecting any potential mates. It's defended by the bishop, and it's also supporting the knight. So queen f4 here, key move to remember. Black should continue with knight c2 check, and after king d1, black is okay to go for the trade, and then both sides will win a rook in the corner. But now after d6, cutting off the coordination of the bishop and the knight, so the knight can no longer retreat. White can play knight to c3 and has a little bit of space, but also a little bit healthier of a pawn structure. Black does have this isolated queen's pawn and seems to be a little bit behind in development here, but this is a relatively balanced endgame, slightly better for white, that I don't think black needs to necessarily go for this. This bishop c5, I think there's better alternatives. One of the alternatives to bishop to c5 is bishop b4 check. I think this one's a little bit more forcing because you have to respond to this. You can block with the knight or the pawn, but I rather like bishop to d2. This is also what has been played by masters in the master database. And after bishop d2, they have to respond to pressure on the bishop. Black can also take on e4. White is completely okay to lose this pawn here. In return for the pawn, they are going to get some rather nice developments, like bishop e2 here, and then king d8. Black does need to respond to the fork here. If they try something like queen takes g2, there's bishop f3, and if the queen moves, then c7 is falling. So lots of traps here. Just need to be a little bit careful in prioritizing what you need to defend and what is actually okay to capture in the moment. So king d8 defending c7. Now we get castles by white. This also defends g2. And okay, we get a trade on d2, but white's happy. They're developing their last piece with a tempo on the queen. And now after queen f4, moving the queen to safety, you can go g3, hitting the queen, and the queen retreats. And this is going to be slightly better for white. You are down a pawn, but all your pieces are being developed, and black is still going to have to worry about particularly this light square bishop, but also the fact that their king is stuck in the center. It's going to be a little difficult for black's king to find some safety here. It's not saying it's totally bad, but this is one of the lines that you can go for. If you don't get caught in the center with your king, you're up a pawn. So, alrighty. So that kind of covers the knight b5 sideline here. But let's get into the main move, knight to c3. So knight to c3 is met with bishop to b4. This is the most direct move in response to white's play with knight c3. Bishop b4 is pinning the knight, removing a defender of e4, so the e4 pawn is hanging again. So again, I'm going to turn to the chat and ask what you do in response to this move. Bishop b4. What do we do about e4? Again, f3 is illegal. Don't try it. Bishop d3 just hangs the knight on d4. How do you respond? What should the mentality be? Clause e2. Well, what goes to e2? You have 4 different pieces that can go to e2. You have a queen that can go to e2. You have your bishop that can go to e2. Your knight on d4 can go to e2. Your king can go to e2. The only one that I see that defends e4 is queen e2. So I don't know if that's what you're suggesting, or if you're suggesting we, well, okay, we can't do that because, like, knight takes d4, right? So, like, okay, Springer is saying queen to d2. Claus is saying knight to e2. So let's take a look at these moves. Knight to e2. Why does knight e2 not exactly work? Well, okay, the first thing I want to check is if black can just simply get away with taking the pawn. And here it kind of looks like they can. White can follow up with, like, bishop d2, breaking the pin, and now they have to move their queen, but black's gotten this pawn. So if that's something you're okay with, I guess you can try knight e2. But even instead of queen takes e4, what if just knight f6? Black's continuing their development. They're hitting your center pawn again. You still can't defend it. You can't push it because knight takes. So, like, this pawn's going to fall. Black is, like, catching up in development. They're getting ready to castle. This looks stronger to me than just queen takes e4. So knight d to e2, I don't know. The other move is queen to d2. All right, so we have a lot of suggestions in the chat here. So queen to d2 here actually is not, like, the worst move in the position, but I don't like that you're blocking your dark squared bishop. Like, where's this bishop going to go and develop in the future? You know, there is the point that if black takes on e4, white is going to be fine after taking with the knight, and after bishop d2, they can recapture with the bishop, and knight takes d4. This is fine. This is an even position. You can totally go for this. But black is not required to take on e4. Black can play something else. Let's say, what if I just take on c3? Probably taking back with the queen, but now they take on e4. So you're still losing this pawn. And, okay, you have bishop e3 as an option, defending the knight again. Knight to e2 looks okay. So again, you're down a pawn. You're trading off a set of pieces. It's probably fine. But again, I don't like how it blocks the bishop. All right, we have another try of bishop to d2 first, breaking the pin. Unfortunately, by breaking the pin, you also break the defense of your knight, and they can just capture on d4. So bishop d2 does not work. Yeah, oof. But it's okay. So here, the only move that really leaves white with a healthy advantage and also scores very well in the database is bishop to e2. And, okay, Nick, you're talking about, you know, letting this pawn hang, but what if What if black goes for this again? They take on c3, white captures, and queen to e4. Well, you get a castle, and now black has a couple things they need to think about. Mainly, what happens if this rook comes to e1 with the queen and the king? So, engine here is giving knight d4, pawn takes d4, and queen bails out on h4. But still, like rook b1 putting pressure on b7, or rook e1. Rook e1 is still just very fine, hitting the king. You really need to like get him out of here, or just knight e7 is probably the move here. But all of white's pieces are being developed. This bishop can come to a3 even in the near future. Be fine. Yeah, also very good pointer, Springer in the chat saying white has the bishop pair, and that is actually going to be a very valid form of compensation for the pawn here, as the board is very open. Black has not occupied the center with their pawns. They're all still on the second rank. And for what pawns white does have in the center, it's not like so many pawns that are there that it's interfering with the bishops in any way. So, yes, very nice point. The bishop pair does give you compensation. So, that's the very direct bishop takes c3 and queen e4. But that is not what black has typically played, especially since you don't need to take on c3 right away to take on e4. So there's two options here I want to cover. I'll cover queen takes e4 in just a second, but very quick, there have been tries where black plays knight g to e7 as well, and I want to make sure I cover this before I forget. So knight g e7, just developing the piece, looking to castle. Well, the most direct thing for white to do here is castle and break this pin, reinstating the connection of the knight to the pawn. And now if black is really wanting to win a pawn, this is the moment they capture on c3. The pawn captures so you're not down a piece. And now queen e4. Now after queen takes e4, white has two options. They can go rook e1, or they can go bishop f3. I like bishop f3, a bit more direct, hits the queen, and once the queen moves to safety on h4, there's moves like knight b5. This is always going to be a move we want to keep an eye out for, threatening c7. Also, forcing black to give up his right to castle, getting the king stuck in the center. And now you can go with something like rook e1, taking control of this open file. And I think here, white definitely has a comfortable position at the cost of a pawn. But okay, we'll get back to it. After bishop e2, queen takes e4, taking advantage of the fact that the knight on c3 is pinned. How do we continue here? The queen is hitting g2. Is this something we need to worry about? If it's not, if we don't need to worry about queen takes g2, what should we do as white? Hello in the chat, Polar Bear. Does anyone in the chat play the Scotch? Or maybe you play queen h4 as black. All right, we have knight d to b5. Okay, what is the point of knight b5? And it is just knight b5. The knight on c3 is pinned, so we don't need to specify which knight. But you have this idea of knight b5. What's the point behind it? Because you are just saying, you know, like, oh, I'm not worried about queen takes g2. All right, so so the point of knight b5 is to hit c7, very valid point, but you're still not addressing the concern about g2. Again, that knight b5 is a fine move, but I want to know what your response is to queen g2. We have another guess of just castling in this position. You cannot forget about your knight on d4 here. If you just castle, they can take. They can take with either piece. There's two attackers, there's only one defender, so you cannot just castle. All right, awesome. So we do have in the chat people getting the correct solution here, that if queen g2, bishop f3, or you can go knight c7 first. That's also one of the things I was hoping someone would mention, which one you play first. Because you do have these two different ideas. Here in this specific instance, it doesn't really matter which order you play them, but bishop f3 does force the queen out. Once the queen is out, you can go knight c6 right away here, but I also really like bishop to f4. This also maintains the same level of advantage, and you don't have to take on c7 right away. They can go queen e6, and after queen e2, queen trade, you're in a better endgame. c7 is still hanging. But the reason I prefer this is because you are developing this extra piece, this bishop on f4, which is now going to allow you to consider moves like castles queenside, or even just swinging this rook right over to d1, and there's still no way to defend c7. So this is one move that I'm definitely a big fan of, bishop f4. So yes, knight b5 is completely safe to play, not worrying about g2. Okay, so after knight b5, how should black respond? c7 is a threat. Let's see. If they try something like queen e5, hitting the knight, they can't win it. It is defended by the bishop, not by the knight because of this pin. But like, okay, let's say they tried queen e5, hitting the knight, trying to protect c7. What tactic exists here? I believe this one was actually featured in an Eric Rosen video, so I will give him credit for that. Queen to e5. How can we punish black for this? Someone's seen the video. Yeah, f4. f4 here hitting the queen. Now this may look a little strange because you are pushing your f-pawn forward, and as we know, Ben Feingold, one of the grandmasters who taught here for a long time, always says never move your f-pawn. So what's the point of moving the f-pawn? The point here is that there's actually nowhere for the queen to go that keeps c7 protected. So with nowhere to go for the queen, like, I don't know, queen c5, just knight c7, check, and you're going to pick up the exchange with a winning position. Queen c5 is probably the best move because it stops white from castling, but this won't mean anything if white is up a rook, or rather an exchange. The knight is likely going to get trapped. So f4, definitely the way to punish your opponent. So that's why we see in this position black take on c3 with check. Now the only way for white to keep the initiative here, they can try taking with the knight, but then queen takes g2 actually is possible, because now after bishop h3, or sorry, bishop f3 and queen h3, there is no knight c7. So you don't have this initiative anymore. So the point here is that after they take on c3, you should take with your b-pawn. And this is going to be your common theme in the Steinitz variation, is that white is ready to double their pawns, even give up the pawn to have this attack. And now you'll notice that this trick still exists if queen g2 is still losing for black after bishop f3, queen h3, because knight c7 exists at the end. So having this knight on b5, definitely helping white out here. And now black has a couple options, I think, but king d8 is the most direct, just identifying that, hey, c7 is hanging. I don't want to lose my rook. I'm going to defend. And now I think the play for white starts to become a little bit easier. You just castle, you defend g2, the knight develops to f6, and now bishop to g5. There's also this idea of playing a6 and hitting the knight back towards the center and trading, but this, I can't recommend this for black. The doubled pawns is, really what white was fighting against. That was sort of giving compensation to black, but here you're undoubling the pawns. White has the bishop pair. They're up in development. Bishop f3 is going to come with tempo on the queen. Rook e1 on an open file. All these moves are very easy for white to find and play without much play from black. So I don't recommend going a6. I just recommend knight f6, completing your development. And now bishop to g5 is a very good move here, just pinning the knight. I believe there is a system going around here with bishop to f3 hitting the queen first. This is also fine. Bishop f3 is totally good. You're hitting the queen. Oops. Freaking Tracy out, moving the board. But okay, bishop f3 is another system. The queen moves to f5, and you can play with c4 and open up this diagonal for the bishop. So the bishop can go to a3. You're looking at possible sacrifices on d6. And after something like knight e5, you can drop the bishop back to e2. This is another way to play for white if you're looking for something less analyzed. But bishop g5 does exist, and here one sample line is rook e8. I know this has been going around on the internet. I'm not a big fan of rook e8. I don't think this is accurate at all, because white achieves a very easy position. After bishop d3, the queen retreats, and now queen h5. Taking advantage of the fact the knight is pinned. If the knight is pinned, h7 is hanging, f7 is weak. This knight on b5 is just chilling. It's supported by the bishop. So rook e8, I really hope black never plays that. And instead just goes d6. And after d6, this is kind of where I'll leave the position for you guys to analyze on your own. Black has achieved opening the diagonal for the bishop. On the other hand, something like bishop f6 and gf6 can ruin black's pawn structure. You can make the claim that rook g8 is going to give you some compensation, but right here after d6, I think this is still a good enough try for black to play for. The evaluation is like plus 0.7, so slightly better for white, but okay, if you're not, over 2,500, really what difference does 0.7 and 0 make? So I'll give it just a couple seconds here in case anyone has any questions about the Steinitz variation. Otherwise, we're going to get right into the queen f6 lines. So we'll do just a quick review of the line, just in case there's any questions along the way. We have e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, our main Scotch position. Black captures on d4, knight takes, and queen h4. This is the start of the Steinitz variation. Knight b5 is a sideline that focuses on attacking c7, whereas the main line is knight c3, bishop to b4, and bishop to e2, giving up the pawn for more development. And so some tricks here with if black ever takes on g2 when we had the knight on b5. Queen takes e4, taking advantage of the pinned knight. Knight to b5, hitting c7. And if the queen ever takes on g2 while the knight is on b5, it's a bad move for black. If this knight is not on b5, white needs to be worried about queen takes g2. Takes with the pawn. Again, knight on b5, very important. And now king d8 addressing the fork. Now we just get natural development castles, knight f6, bishop g5, and d6. And okay, I don't see why white's, shouldn't go for this. Maybe if you want to keep the bishops on the board, that's fine, but this is a way they can continue. This is the Steinitz variation. All right, let's move into queen f6. So I thought this was actually very interesting. This is actually, on the rare occasions that I do play 1e5 as black, I will play this variation, mainly because it's a bit of a surprise weapon. I don't think that many people who play the Scotch will have this variation memorized. A lot of their memorization is probably going to go towards queen h4 or the two main lines, knight f6 or bishop c5. But queen f6 is like black's fourth or fifth best move, or most played move rather, and doesn't have as much analysis for it. So let's get into that. Again, our normal Scotch position, but now instead of queen h4 like the Steinitz, we have queen f6. And as far as I know, this one does not have a name. So we're just calling it the queen f6 line in the Scotch. And here, white has more than one good system against this move. So if you're playing this as black, you will need to know a couple ideas that white has, but in general, I think this one is pretty easy to play, at least for the black side. So, all right, what are some of the options here? Why don't we take a look at knight b5? We just took a look at knight b5 in the other line. How is this one different? Well, let's take a look at bishop c5. So in the other line, bishop c5, I wasn't the biggest fan of, but here it makes a lot of sense. You're developing threatening mate in 1. You have to do something about it. You can't just capture. Again, if you capture this pawn prematurely, there's no way to save the knight and mate. So in the queen h4 line against bishop c5, we had queen f3. But now this may not be as favorable for white. First off, the trade isn't necessarily something to be scared of because black does need to give up the right to castle in order to do this. But they do have bishop to b6, and black doesn't have to trade the queens, and white doesn't necessarily want to trade the queens either. If white takes, black is going to be more than happy to develop their knight. So both sides a little hesitant to trade off queens first, and because white does not want black to take, they do typically go queen g3, hitting c7 again, but this is easily stopped with d6. And you'll notice here, black is not struggling with development nearly as much as if they went queen h4. You're not going to have the big attacks on e4 here, but in general, I think the position is opening itself up faster than if the queen were on h4. So definitely want to point out that idea here for both sides here, bishop c5. You can't really go queen f3 for the reasons I said. It's a pretty healthy position for black. The main move here is queen e2, and this scores very well for white. White has 48% win and 48% draw, so that leaves only 4% loss for white here, which, if you ask me, those are some pretty good odds. So queen e2, and black drops the bishop back to b6. Again, the point of this is to stop knight to c7. And after bishop to b6, white can develop their other knight to c3. We have knight g to e7, bishop e3, hitting this bishop on b6. So something like capturing on b6 captures a knight c7 is a real threat. And the way that black deals with this threat is bishop a5. Might look a little counterintuitive because you are moving this bishop yet again, but okay, bishop takes b6 was a real threat. But here, we'll actually see white castle to the queen side, something that we didn't really see in the other line. The other line was a lot of castling king side and rook e1. This is one of those variations where you're able to castle queen side and get away with it. And really, black's best option, probably a6. Kick the knight goes back to d4. There's a trade on c3, and okay, your queen side is opening up as white, so this could be a little concerning, but if you look at black's pieces, the knights are really not in a position, the queen also is really not in a position to take advantage of this somewhat exposed king. There's also king d2 at any moment if you do need to run to safety. So you'll see black just typically play d6, and you'll get natural development from both sides, and this can be one of the positions you get. So that's kind of this knight b5 idea here after queen f6. All right, what are some other variations you have here? Knight f3 is another system that's been going around. And I think here bishop b4 is the most played move. So this is what I'm going to look over. Bishop b4, you should block with the pawn, get a tempo on the bishop, and now the bishop goes to c5. What is the purpose of including this check? So normally if I'm teaching a beginner about developing their pieces, I tell them you don't want to play moves like bishop b4 because when they block with c3, you have to move the piece again and you're losing time. So why is black willing to go for this? What is so important that black feels giving up this tempo is justified? Very nice, very nice. So it is to block the knight coming to c3. And with knight to c3, there's a couple things going on. First, that's the most natural square for the knight. The knight would like to go to c3, ideally go to d5 in the future, maybe knight b5. Like knight c3, knight b5 has been an idea we've been looking at all night. So that's one idea. And also knight c3 helps protect e4. So if, you know, the knight isn't on c3 protecting e4, e4 could be a weakness. So I think after c3 and bishop c5, first off, please don't play knight d2. Just focus on developing the rest of your pieces. Bishop to e2 is more than fine. And after d6, black's trying to develop. You can castle kingside, knight g to e7. And you have some nice play here on the queen side with moves like b4, bishop to b6, and bishop g5. So you can still develop your pieces normally. Nothing really special is happening here. The point of bishop h4 is actually in response to like bishop h3. So if bishop h3 is played, you can drop this bishop back, and now bishop g4 can be played. So did want to mention that that is the point of bishop h4. You're going to drop back to g3 in response to bishop h3. But okay, the center pawn's also up for grabs. Black has a couple different ideas here. I think a5 is a bit more serious, but again, nothing too crazy. You can defend with the pawn. Takes. If the knight takes on b4, the point of this is that if you take, they win the rook. Don't give up your rook. Just you can take on e7, force their king to give up its castling rights, and you can develop with something like knight c3, maybe looking to go to d5 in the future. So nothing too crazy here. So that's kind of your bishop b5. Let's see. I don't think there's much variation on this. I think they can try h6 here. This is just to stop bishop g5. If they try h6, stopping your natural development, focus on your other natural moves like castles and queen c2. Queen c2 can be a nice move just to kind of pass. So black has to make a decision here. Queen c2 also helps defend e4. And okay, black plays something like a5. You can develop the knight this way. You're okay giving up this, making this concession of doubled pawns so you can get bishop to b2. But if they don't go for that, then you're getting some play on the queen side. Otherwise, if black castles, you have your normal b4 and a4 pushes that will get you some play. You also have b5 in this specific example. So, got some play on the queen side there. I don't think there is much more to cover with knight f3 here. So what are the other two systems? There's two other systems that white has here. If you go to Lichess and you turn on the engine, and you also open up the Openings Explorer, you'll notice knight takes c6 is the top recommendation. And here black does have this in-between move, bishop c5. They don't have to capture the knight on c6 right away. And the point of bishop c5 is this checkmate pattern we've been seeing throughout the night. So don't get greedy and think you can just bring your knight back. Like knight a5, you're just getting checkmated. So please don't make these mistakes. I don't want to see it. You do need to protect your pawn, or really protect your king. So something like queen d2 here is definitely fine for keeping your king safe. You are blocking your bishop, so moves like queen f3 are also possible. But I was looking around and queen d2 wasn't the worst option. Black does best just to take towards the edge of the board. Now, again, if I'm telling my students, how should you capture with your pawns if there's multiple options? Normally, you're going to see coaches tell their students, capture towards the center. But this is one of those instances where if you capture towards the center, you can probably play d5. But your light-scored bishop is suffering. If it goes to b7, it's going to be sitting there for a while before you can play c5 and open up the diagonal. And if it goes to a3, it's going to get snapped off by the white bishop. So rather than suffer with problems in development with your light squared bishop, you can capture away from the center, and now this is actually going to give you some extra protection when you castle queenside, which is ultimately what we're going to see black do in this system. White normally develops with knight c3, overprotecting e4, bishop e6, getting prepared to castle, knight to a4, kind of in between move, attacking the bishop, so it goes back and it's safe. And now queen e3. So the point of queen e3 is not just getting out of the way of the bishop, but after black castles queenside, there is a rook on d8. So this also gets the queen out of the way for that. And now black has a couple options, but I thought one interesting option that the game could continue is queen h4, and after g3, queen h5, bishop d2. Now both sides are going to try to castle queenside, and there are a couple trades that can be made. After knight f6, there's something like bishop e2, and now there's a possibility of bishop g4, but all this is just, it's not that important to the position. This is just a way that it could go for both sides, and we finish with castling here. And this is a very balanced position. This is completely fine for both sides. I don't know who I'd rather have, because with black you can say you have some extra safety with the extra pawn over here. With white you can say that you have a pawn majority on the king side. So that's the debate about this position. But okay, other than knight takes c6, there is one other serious attempt that I wanted to talk about, and then we'll open up the floor to any questions people have. The last system here is the one that I see the most whenever I'm playing against it. Now, it's not like, I don't think it's the best system, but the move tried, at least against me the most, is bishop to e3. And this is saying, okay, I have realized your threat of taking my knight. I'm just going to defend it, and I'm also going to protect f2 a little bit while developing a piece. And black does have a very nice continuation, so I wanted to include this line for black here, is bishop c5, and now really the only way to save the knight effectively is c3. You can try knight b5 here going for the pawn, but I don't know if I can say having the doubled pawns here is like, it's a little bit too significant for me to want to go for c7 here, especially something like queen h4 going for e3 right away, or sorry, e4 right away. This is okay. It makes me uncomfortable to see white go for this because the black queen is like so active. But I guess you can make the argument this is playable. Engines are giving it, -1. I don't think it's that easy for white to fight back for equality. I think that one does give white some problems. But white can just say, okay, c3, I don't need to worry about any of this. So, yeah. So someone's mentioning that they liked the knight b5 system as soon as they played queen f6. That was a good system. I was just explaining, what happens if bishop e3, because bishop e3 is the fourth system that we're talking about. So two separate systems. But yeah, it's important not to make sure you get these knight b5 ideas mixed up between the different systems, because there are times when it works, and then in this case, this time it doesn't. So okay, white goes c3, defending the knight again. This does deprive white's knight on b1 of the c3 square, but your priority should be defend this knight. Black can continue with knight g to e7, looking to castle, and then bishop c4. This is just a nice developing move. You're not really doing it to put pressure on f7 just because it's defended too well, but it is a very active square. And now black does best to continue with something like knight e5. I do want to mention that what may look like a trick, knight c6, is actually like really bad for white. Here, just you can take on e3 right away, even, because it does come with a threat of mate. But also, black doesn't have to do that. They can just capture with queen and the bishop is safe. I should have mentioned that the point of taking was this discovery on the bishop. So queen captures c6 is equal, but bishop takes e3 is even better because now white is forced to double up the pawns to stop the mate, and now black can capture with the knight. This is fine. Capturing with the pawn is also good because now the bishop opens itself up. I just want to thank you for the sub. But yeah, there's so many good moves here for black. But knight takes c6, probably the best. Then you're going to look for d6 and castle short. So if you are the player with the white pieces, while it may look attractive at first, knight takes c6, it's best just not to play it. Develop another piece, get closer to castling. Now after bishop c4, there is knight e5 hitting the bishop. Bishop can drop back to e2. And the reason why we allow this, so earlier I was asking why does black go bishop check to force the pawn forward, because there was a concession there. Why is white okay going to c4 and then to e2 instead of just e2 right away? Right? So doesn't white save time by going to e2 right away? What is the point here? I guess this would be a transposition into the main line. I'm not too familiar with the main line of the Scotch because prepping those over the next week. But yeah, I guess this would. Anyways, we're getting a sneak peek at these positions, right? Yeah, so we do have someone getting an idea here that with this knight on e5, there's actually a possibility we can play f4 in the future with tempo. So let's say something like queen g6. Black may be looking to play this just to tempo the pawn while we castle. And okay, if black takes this pawn right away, white is going to be okay by playing knight d2, hitting the queen, and getting development. Knight b5 is also probably working here. If bishop b6, I think you can just take. And the only way to defend is by queen takes. So rather than just let white develop freely like this, you normally see black focus on their own development first with d6. And now you have a choice as white. You can go f3 or f4. f3 is played about, 3-4 times more than f4. But f4 is also an idea here, and this may be one of the reasons why you go bishop c4 first, luring the knight to e5 to get this aggressive move in. Otherwise, you'll see white play f3, and then after castles, something like knight d2, getting your last piece developed, and d5 coming through. Something like king h1 is fine, and if they take on e4, you can take with the f-pawn, and you have this open file for your rook. So I just kind of wanted to show these systems. I think I'll leave this one here. There's definitely more moves here, but I think now we're starting to get into mainline Scotch stuff, which isn't necessarily the point of tonight. Tonight was mainly just focusing on some of these other systems that are just kind of with, queen h4, queen f6. But I do want to open up our last 5-10 minutes here for any questions that the chat may have. About any of these systems. If there's a line in the queen h4 Steinitz variation stuff, we can go back to that. Or if you have a question on any of the 4 queen f6 systems, I'm happy to answer those questions, or at least try. Yeah, we'll give it a little bit here. We'll do our short little review, and if we don't have any questions by the end of the review, we will be done. So we have e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, our Scotch starting position, takes, and queen f6. The first of the systems we went through was knight b5 immediately. Black's best move here is bishop c5 threatening mate, and then white just needs to make sure that they're stopping the checkmate before they go in with this attack. This one's probably the best scoring for white. But you will notice that the queen side does get doubled pawns, and if you're not careful, black could attack on the queen side. Other than knight b5, the other options you have are knight f3. Whoa. Okay, so in this position, knight f3, this is a less familiar system, but it's starting to make its way around with like knight e5 or bishop c5 or even bishop b4. But knight f3, I think just follows, your natural development. Other than knight f3, you do have captures on c6, where both sides may be looking to castle queenside. So that's going to be the line where white has a majority on the king side, but black has extra defense on the queen side here. And then our last system that we looked at for white is if they go bishop e3, which is sounding like it's just a transposition into the classical Scotch here. So you have this nice easy system for black. Moves that are not too difficult to find for each side, which leads to relatively equal positions. All right, so there is our summary of Queen F6 lines. I don't see any questions here in the chat, so we're going to take a short break. This was it for Chess Openings Explained. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back with the return of the Winner's Circle. It's been a while since we've done one of those, but we do have the St. Petersburg tournament, which was the first super tournament really of chess. So we'll get back into that in just a second. See you shortly.